Welcome to another season of Distory. This is the start of season 3. My name is Kirk with walruscarp.com. And with me, as always, is the well-researched, amazing author, soon to have another book out, Kate, the Disney Cicerone. Kate, how are we doing for the beginning of season 3? Mini applause.
I'm honestly can't believe it's 3 seasons already, but it's been a pretty amazing journey. Was what, episode 84 or something like that of Distory?
It has been an amazing journey, and trust me, it's gone by for all the things that we cover on this in terms of theme park education, and I think sometimes that can be a really heady topic for people and you get lost in it. But I don't know, I always feel like these are so fun and so entertaining, and I know that you and I have been extremely excited about our big multi-episode theme park attraction that we're going to do this season. Do you want to intro it?
Yeah, so this is one that I think a lot of people have asked us to do. These are ones that we've been really excited to do because it blends. If you know me and Kirk, Kirk tends to lean more towards like the 80s, 90s history, and I lean a little bit more towards, 50s, 60s. So this one blends both of our our loves together because we are going to be diving into the history of Big Thunder Mountain. In order to do that, we really have to go back to the beginning of Frontierland. We have to go to Rainbow Caverns Mine Train and Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland and all the way through there, even Thunder Mesa. We have to talk about a lot of the Frontierland history in the theme parks in order to fully understand where this ride came from. So very excited to dive into that.
Yeah, I didn't realize how many precursors to Big Thunder there were, particularly in Disneyland. So it just was really exciting to find. I don't know, I didn't know half this stuff existed. So it was cool.
Yeah, well, it's true. Like every time I mention some of these smaller things that we're going to talk about tonight, people are always like, "I had no idea that ever existed in Disneyland." So I'm very happy to be able to share some of this stuff tonight. And so I know that I feel like where we should start, it just at least to nod to it, is that I think we have to acknowledge Knott's Berry Farm, because they did have their ghost town. So Walter Knott and Walt Disney were friends, and friends all the way through. They never became like competitors, even though they were very close together. And Knott's Berry Farm also benefited from Disneyland because more people came in the area and they decided to go to both parks. So they were never direct competitors. Walt Disney studied a lot about Knott's Berry Farm. He'd go there and literally measure the sidewalks to see how wide the sidewalk should be. And he would go for chicken dinners. Walter Knott and Walt Disney, they were friends, and they met because of their mutual love of trains. So Walt Disney was fascinated by the full train set, complete with an 1888 vintage coal-burning engine that Knott had acquired from Colorado, and he was converting it into a diesel, which would become the Calico Railroad. So that was what inspired the Disneyland Railroad. And we won't go in the history of Disneyland Railroad here, because that's multi-episode series in its own.
Wait, what? The railroad? At least your railroad's interesting. The one at Disney World it's a travesty.
It's a snooze fest. It's true. The Disneyland one is wonderful. But anyway, so they were friends that studied trains together. But the Frontierland part of it is that they had a place called a ghost town, and they still do, that looked like this. It looks very similar to what we see in Frontierland. It has those western feel to it, western fronts. And Walter Knott, actually, the first building in the ghost town, imported it from Prescott, Arizona. So it was like an actual building that he took from a ghost town, which is kind of cool. So just to give you kind of a context of where Walt Disney pulled the idea for Frontierland. And then, of course, they turned it into this wonderful series. When they were doing their Disneyland episode for ABC, they did a Davy Crockett series that was like phenomenally popular. Everybody loved it, brought back coonskin caps in America, and that really kind of cemented the love for Frontierland into American culture. So that being said, kind of giving us that setup there, Kirk, do you want to like maybe run with some of the things that you found about
Frontierland? Yeah, I would love to.
Okay.
Side note, I just ran into a TikTok today of a beaver blanket, and they stretched a giant beaver pelt, and it was fascinating like how large it came. And I just think of like old style things like that you couldn't find them in the parks today, but would be commonplace to see those kinds of things at both Knott's and here in Disneyland, which is so weird, but so awesome.
Well, yeah, the coonskin cap is really interesting story because there was such a demand for coonskin caps after they had Davy Crockett on everybody's television in America but there was no fur trade going on at that point in the 1950s. Right. So like, where do they get them? Well, they found like this old warehouse that was owned by like China, in the US, of like abandoned furs. And so they bought them for them like wholesale and then then made all these coonskin hats. And then they came back in, and you can still see one if you're in Walt Disney World. You can still see it in the Country Bear Jamboree for now. Well, it's still open. He does wearing one while he sings Davy Crockett.
They actually sell them in that Frontierland trading company and at Big Al's little like kind of kiosk store outside. Like nobody ever buys them. They take a funny picture and then they walk away. I don't think it has the significance. But I'm going to take us back all the way to 1951 with Mickey Mouse Park and Harper Golf. And there's a reason for that, because if you look at the history of the park itself, Disneyland, there was always kind of this ghost town train station. But more importantly, what we're looking at for Big Thunder is going to be this like more frontier area with bulls and a Conestoga, or this is actually a stagecoach. There's also a Native American camp in the background. So in the very, very first inklings in 1951 of what could be a theme park, this is all blue sky as we would call it now, did have some sort, actually almost all of the themes were Western in nature.
Yeah, I think he was, Walt Disney was definitely inspired by that Knott's Berry Farm idea of the ghost town, and loved the idea of the Old West. It was very, very popular in that era. If you think about the old Western movies and whatnot that were going on. So it makes sense, especially because the park was, I believe Mickey Mouse Park was going to be across the street from the studios. It would make sense to have one that was kind of like almost movie themed in that way, where you're stepping into a set, right? You're stepping into a movie, to have it be Western themed.
Yeah, especially considering they were doing Davy Crockett films. So now I'm heading to the Herb Ryman.
Did you say herb?
Herb. Yeah, because I'm British, so we pronounce the H.
They call it Herbie.
The Disneylands that he did over, he drew it over a weekend for a couple of milkshakes. This concept, which ends up becoming paramount, and they use this multiple times to actually build out what the park is going to look like. So even though this is the very first of what Disneyland is going to look like, this really does become the forefront and almost what the park looks like. Although there are a couple of elements that don't exist, like there was going to be a massive circus tent area that was a big paramount part. But the things that I noticed, again, these are things that are leaving us towards Big Thunder, is if I bring this up here, I'll use this guy to direct your attention. We have our ghost town. We have stagecoaches, Conestoga wagon. We get a farm, which I'll mention in a second. Then you notice that there's also a stagecoach down here and a little pathway. There's also what looks like another trail. And then in the background, that southwestern style kind of mountainous plain. So this whole area, which is where we're going to be talking about, was in this original 1953 concept.
Yeah, and so what I have over here on the other side is like a pre-opening view of Disneyland, which is definitely a little bit different than the one we have today. But you can see Frontierland is those red buildings that are in the center, and then there's all these paths that go back through the painted desert. So that's a very early version of Frontierland there. But this one did change quite a bit till opening day. But this is what the first view of Disneyland for the public looked like. So they said it was going to cost $9 million and will open midsummer of 1955.
It's not that much.
No. Well, and it was completed in a year, right?
Yeah. So. It's pretty amazing considering. So this is the proposed diagrammatic layout of Disneyland. And when we go over here, this is really where things start to get us to that Frontierland / Big Thunder area that has pony rides, a corral. This is that Frontierland area. Granny's Farm, Stagecoach Road, Pack Mule Ride. There is a river that says ford. So like you're supposed to like go over the river, particularly with the pack mules. There's a natural bridge, and then up here again labeled Indian Camp. Again, these are all things from history. So like in terms of like terminology, if anything gets used, I'm using specifically what they language and reference, not today's kind of common language. And then the last part that gets added here is the painted desert, which we will talk about and reference what that actually becomes. So this entire area right here is where modern day Big Thunder is located. It's like right up in here, but it gets utilized by technically 4 other attractions before that. So, all right, now we get out of like the concepts, which have lots of these Western themes, and we get into actual opening day attractions. So,
can I mention something real quick?
Yes, you may.
I do have a description of Frontierland from one of those really early brochures when it opened. It says, America's frontiers from revolutionary days to the great Southwest settlement live again in Frontierland. You'll actually experience the high adventure of our forefathers who shaped our glorious history. You'll meet the challenge of wilderness and desert as you board a stagecoach or Conestoga wagon, travel aboard a sternwheeler on a colorful river trip, visit the Western Saloon, meet the Western mining town, ride a raft to Tom Sawyer Island, see Indian Joe's Cave and Fort Wilderness, board a real mining train, and thrill to Rainbow Caverns Falls. It all adds up to hours of fun and excitement for you in Frontierland. I think this is like 1956, if I'm looking at it, the rides. But that kind of gives a little introduction of like, this is how they were presenting Frontierland, is you're going into the people who paved the way, the pioneers that paved the way to like build our nation, is how they were framing Frontierland at the time.
Yeah, I also found also opening on the back of the map where it shows specifically buggy rides, buckboard rides, wagon rides, stagecoach rides, and mule pack rides along the wagon trails.
Yeah, I think some of those were on Frontierland and some of them were on Main Street USA. So it depends on where you were.
Yeah, so the buckboard rides never actually, like, they do those on Main Street, and I actually have pictures of what the buckboards were, but they were supposed to also be in Frontierland, but they never actually made it to Frontierland. So this is what a buckboard looks like. It's like basically a wagon that just has like a flat section in the back and a spot for the driver. So
that looks safe.
It's probably why they didn't use them.
I love that picture though.
Yeah, there's some cool ones. So okay, I think we can also dive into, I just like seeing this stuff. So nostalgic, if you went to Disneyland, your ticket price was $1, but you would then have to pay for each individual attraction. So when the parks first opened up, they were A tickets, B tickets, and C tickets. Why is this significant for leading us into Big Thunder? Well, the B tickets had for 25 cents, the Conestoga wagon ride, and then the C ticket had for 50 cents a mule pack ride, a stagecoach ride as well. So you know what's kind of weird though? I don't know why this is. This is the only one that's like that, but on the B ticket, the freight train is 50 cents, but everything else on that B ticket is 25 cents. And then if you look at the C tickets, everything is either 35 or 50 cents. So I'm not sure exactly what, like, you would think that everything would be the same amount because the A ticket was 10 cents and everything was 10 cents on there. Yeah, and all the B tickets and C tickets are like all over the place. I don't know why mathematically.
Yeah. And you would buy these usually in a book of tickets. So this would come in a little book. So you would buy your ticket to get into the park for $1, and then you could just go into the park for $1 and not do anything else if you wanted to. But if you wanted to go on any rides, then you can either buy a book of tickets or you could pay per ride, whatever the price was for that ride.
Man, Disney adults would love that. Pay $1 and just walk around and buy, maybe get some food. That would be amazing.
But I know that you've done quite a bit of research on some of these like main attractions in here. Can I just mention some of the smaller ones really quick of the things that were Frontierland?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things was a Davy Crockett arcade and a Davy Crockett Pioneer Museum, which didn't stay open very long. It was like a year and then it was like done. And then they also had something we won't really get into, but it is the Indian Village is what it was called. We could call it Indigenous people these days, but they also had a ceremonial circle for them and the war canoes, which now are the Davy Crockett canoes. But I wanted to point this out because my mom actually gave me some of her old pictures from when she went to Disneyland in 1955. And so I do have one of the circle of what it looked like.
Oh, wow.
So you can see that. And then I also have one of my mom for when we talk about the pack mule rides. This is actually my mama on the pack mule rides with Rainbow Ridge next
Oh,
to
no
her.
way.
Isn't that cool? That's my mom.
That's very cool.
So, yeah, I have deep roots in Disneyland. Shout out to my mom. Thanks for the photos. Appreciate it. She's the one that also gave me this bell. It's the Tinker Bell that's from Disneyland from 1955, which I looked it up. It's actually quite valuable because not many of these exist. But I do have that bell. And my aunt gave me her jacks.
To self, what to snag first when I break into Kate's house.
And my aunt also got these jacks from Disneyland too. And she gave them to me from 1955. So they're super old and the ball doesn't bounce anymore. But it's quite fun to have those. Anyway, so just thought I would mention
Gotta love living history. Sounds pretty good. That bell sounded pretty good.
It is, yeah.
For some reason, I feel like that's what you would ring to get the kids' attention.
Yeah, I should.
Homeschooling,
I should start doing that more. Other things that are in this area that I don't think you're probably going to talk about. There's the Willard P. Bounds Blacksmith U.S. Marshal shop. And this is not actually the U.S. Marshal. This is one of their actors that would walk around in Frontierland. But so this was named after Willard Pelhol Bounds, who lived from 1857 to 1916, and he was actually a historic U.S. Marshal in Idaho and a blacksmith, but he was also the father of Lillian Bounds, who became Lillian Disney, who is Walt Disney's wife. So his father-in-law was an actual U.S. Marshal in Idaho, and then he put his name in Disneyland, which I think is really cool. So that used to be there, and it's still kind of around today. If you look around, there's a little sign that is posted here that talks about the documents, associated with this, ride for compliance and whatnot, but it is signed at the bottom with Willard P. Bounds. So it's still kind of there in Frontierland today. Other things they had a Dixieland bandstand, the Mike Fink keelboats, which we've mentioned in the past. And I think that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let you talk about some of the other things you researched. I just wanted to mention those things.
No. I like it. So one of the things that I spent time researching and spent too much time looking at were pictures of mules.
Yeah.
So when first of all, I had no idea that they had actual live animal like rides necessarily outside of, there's experiences and whatnot, but I had no idea that they had like mules you could ride around. It's very much, it reminds me of like the tourist thing that you would do when you would go to the Grand Canyon. Like when I was a kid, I always heard you could ride a mule down the Grand Canyon. But here in 1955, you'd get loaded up on a mule that would be, They had somewhere around 50 to, sorry if I laughed the entire time because this just sounds so outlandish to me to think that Disneyland had like real animals, but this is so wild. This reminds me more of like a farm than it does necessarily a theme park, so it's just crazy to me. They had anywhere between 50 and 75 of these pack mules. They also used a combination of Scandinavian donkeys to help not only with the mule rides, but also with pulling either Conestoga wagons or stagecoaches as well. Now you would think, how expensive would it be to have 50 to 75 of these things, and they're all corralled around? I mean, hang on, let me see if I can pull up another picture. So they had a resting area, but the problem with having live animals is that this attraction would be completely incumbent on how the animals are feeling. Are they stubborn? Do they want to actually move? And they're in a giant train. So like, think of it as they're all single file. So for those that are just listening to the podcast, they're going up like a dusty, grassy trail with some hillsides, which most of the hillsides were built from areas that they dug out and flattened with like just leftover dirt. So a lot of the grasses and whatnot that are growing are just like natural wild grasses, not necessarily like planted things. And then they would go through these little paths and trails. And it was actually really boring in 1955 because you just literally went up a trail, came back around, and then ended up in the main like loading area, right? So it was, you went up the dusty trails, past tall grasses, up near where the waterfront was for the rivers of America, and then whoop, right back into what they deemed town square.
Yeah, so I have a picture here. This is from 1956, but you can see on this map, the little tiny dotted one is the pack mule trail. So at least in 1956, it was altered when they added the mine train, which we'll get into later. But you can kind of see their general path. And I will say that they had quite a time with that big hill that was just dirt, because that first winter, a lot of the water that rained down from the sky washed a lot of the dirt away because they had just piled it there, right? So they actually had to plant a whole bunch of the trees and the shrubs and the things that you see there just to stabilize the soil so that it would stop eroding away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes sense, because down came the rain and washed the
hill into the rivers of America.
Not as good of a nursery rhyme, but yeah, it's just so fascinating. And I love that your mom got an opportunity to ride this because it was a long-standing experience. The pack mules do get changed and altered, and I'm not going to go too much into the Rainbow Ridge pack mules, which will be the second iteration, and then it'll turn into the pack mules through Nature's Wonderland, because it's not until we get the building of Rainbow Ridge, which I don't want to jump into right now, because that's its own history.
We'll get there.
But yeah, the pack mules go from July 1955 all the way through October 1973. So these things lasted a long time. Also, costs. I think this is fun. There were each mule cost roughly 20 cents to feed per day, and the cost for each mule was $50 per. So the fact that they charged the fact that they charged 50 cents for this attraction starting on day one, you only had to have 100 guests or whatever go through, and boom bam, you already paid for your mule. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was probably one of the most cost effective and efficient ones, even though they had trainers, because the way the mules would work is you would have a cast member on the first one leading the entire group, and then you would have 9 subsequent guests afterwards, which could be a mixture of kids and adults.
Well, they actually separated the kids from their parents. So they had the kids kind of like up front. They had them like where they could kind of like keep an eye on them. And then the parents, if the parents participated, which a lot of them didn't, they would just send their kids on the mule ride. The parents would either be at the back, or they'd just be waiting for their kids to come back from said adventure on a mule.
Yeah, well, the biggest problem with the mules is that they're animals and they're not ride vehicles, which we're going to get to, because at 1955, the only kind of moving attractions that you're getting in this Frontierland landscape, not waterscape, is going to be driven by animals. So, imagine as they're wandering around, they would just stop in a trail and not want to go, or they don't want to turn, or they would go the wrong direction, or they would just start eating some of the grasses. So, like,
or they would get startled when the train
Right.
blew its whistle. Yeah.
Right. There was, and even when we get further along, and I know you've told this story before, that one of like Mark Davis's most convincing animals or animatronics would have problems with the mules as well. So, I think it's interesting. And again, they had 50 to 75 of these. Not all of them could work the entire length of a park day,
Yeah,
So
that's true.
how do we feel about the mules? Can we mule on?
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more as we go through this series,
yeah.
but I think that that's a good one.
It's a sufficient primer. Okay. Rock me mama like a wagon wheel. Let's talk about some Conestoga wagons, because I didn't realize, dude, there's so many things that happen when I was looking up wagons that first of all, Westward Ho was written on one of these Conestoga wagons.
Yeah,
and
that's where we get it from.
As a Disney Worlder, I had no idea that Westward Ho literally dealt 100% with Disneyland's foundation, and eventually there becomes a film about this as well. But it also made me learn more about Conestoga wagons in general, because when I was a kid, I played Oregon Trail, and I thought everything was...
Stop. Oregon, not Oregon. You can't say it
Oregon.
that way. Oregon.
I also
Oregon Trail.
I practice Japanese folding paper. I call it origami. Just kidding. No, origami, and Oregon.
Oregon.
Sounds like you're an organ donor.
Oregon.
How do I say it again?
Oregon.
Oregon.
Oregon. Yes, but Oregon, the Oregon Trail. Yes.
The Oregon Trail.
Actually, I know a lot of history about the Oregon Trail. I've studied it quite extensively. So it's
Of course.
beyond playing the game, which I also did. Who didn't? It's what we did. That was our computer education survival class.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
So-
Go ahead.
Well, no, you were telling me how good you were, and I didn't hear you anything about what kind of pace, how many extra yokes, how many oxen did you buy. I didn't hear any of that. That's what this conversation should have been.
I studied other stuff about, I've studied, there was a whole train that came through that had every single man in their party pass away on their way over, and it was only women left. And they still found a way to get all the way over here, even in the middle of winter. They overwintered somewhere in Oregon, and then they got all the way through. So I've read a whole bunch about it, and it's just I just love the Oregon Trail. Sorry, that was a little bit of an aside. We can move on.
No, there's nothing wrong with that, except for I don't know if I trust you anymore, because you found a lot of fascination with a fact that only women survive. What happened to the husbands? What happened to the men? What happened to them? Kate, where did I don't know where they went.
No, they all left. Some of them left trying to find a new route because it became impassable, because so often, how they say you have the two options. You could go on the Applegate Trail, or you could go to the Oregon City Way. It wasn't just float down the Columbia River, although that was an option, but there was a lot of different ways you could go. And if you had a really bad guide, you'd end up in a really bad place. And people didn't usually ride in the wagons either. That's always a thing. They rode in the front, but their stuff rode in the wagons. They actually walked most of the time.
Yeah.
Unless they physically.
Yeah. So actually, I have that's a good little transition, because I did find this is crossing the Mississippi, so they were fording the river during wintertime, and mostly everyone is walking. Although this one does depict some of the kids and women in the wagons while the men are walking. So what's interesting though is, and again, there are a lot of differences between what I thought a Conestoga wagon is versus what mostly was used on the Oregon Trail. So did I say it right?
Yes, you got it. Good job.
Okay. So Conestoga wagons, they came from an area in Lancaster, PA. So it's kind of like the Amish territory that I know. So lots of great construction. But Conestoga wagons, the best way to put it is they were the Peterbilt or the giant tractor trailers of that time period, where the smaller schooner or prairie style wagons were what people really traveled with, because these things were huge. So the fact that Disney used a Conestoga wagon, I think, is interesting, because it wasn't a traditional people moving wagon. And it's because they're massive. They're huge. Like giant boats. It's hard for them to turn. And in fact, the way that Disney has their Conestoga wagons, and I'll show you pictures, is they cut this covered wagon top so that people could see out of them. But yeah, they're massive, absolutely massive in comparison to something that would be a prairie schooner, which is the traditional. This is like, when I think of a covered wagon, this is what I think of. I don't necessarily think of a Conestoga wagon, but the Conestoga wagons, think giant tractor trailer. Prairie schooner, think like your Ford F-150. Like, these things carried freight mainly, not people, but one's more movable and the other one is much larger for larger cargoes.
Well, in the prairie schooners, they're called that because when they were driving through the tall grasses, they would look like they were sailing on the ocean. Yeah, so that's the little sails. But and you can actually go see tracks from the Oregon Trail are still there. You can still see them in the mud on in Baker City, Oregon. They have a Oregon Trail Museum where you can go see artifacts from the trail of things that people left behind because they were too heavy, or like, their oxen passed away or they broke an axle, all the things that actually did happen on the Oregon Trail. You can still see some of their items they left behind are in that museum, but you can go and see the physical tracks are still in the mud because they would create these giant ruts that they would drive in from the people that came before them. And it just kind of got etched into the landscape, so to speak. So you can still see it today.
That's cool. Another total random aside, but it came out of this wagon research, is that the reason why we drive on the right side of the road with our automobiles is because of Conestoga wagons, because they were so massive, and you would have lots of horse traffic as well. They had to move over, and the Conestoga wagons, again, this is my misconception. I always thought of like stagecoaches or the prairie schooners where the driver is sitting in the wagon. Conestoga wagons would have in this case, like a horse driver, like almost like a wheelman, but they would always be on the leftmost horse, and it was easier for them to navigate, being closer on that right-hand side. So this is what led us to driving on the right versus driving on the left.
Yeah, but I wish I'd known we were going to talk about the Oregon Trail. I would have prepared more because I have so much.
I wasn't trying to talk about the Oregon Trail.
I took us there because I was like, oh, yay, we get to talk about Oregon.
Yeah, right.
We live near like Applegate Trail and stuff too. So it's like, it's all just part of our history.
That's fun. So, that's cool. I love that.
I think
so again, here,
I just want to mention that I think the most amazing thing about the Oregon Trail before we move on is the fact that I think the spirit of it that they're trying to capture with this in Frontierland, in Disneyland, is the idea that these people, they walked like over 2,000 miles across the country. Like it took like 6 to 8 months, sometimes more if the weather was bad. Can you imagine walking all the way across the country with all of your possessions and your whole family? Some of them, some of the women had babies while they were traveling across the country. It was incredible how many people migrated west this way on the Oregon Trail. And so I think that's what this is capturing here, is that American spirit of determination of, we want to go and create a new life, and there's opportunity here. And so that, I think, is why we have these as such a heavy presence in Disneyland when it opened, is trying to catch that spirit. So that's just my...
Yeah, it definitely embodies adventure,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And the Wild West, just in general.
Yeah. And plus, it's just a cool way to carry and have as a ride. You know what I mean? So I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
So Conestoga wagons also were mainly pulled by oxen, but here in Disneyland, they were pulled by horses. And your driver, again, is now inside of the vehicle, and they would load them from the back. It was basically think of like a tailgate that would go all the way down and had steps included on it. And then it would take you around a similar path as the pack mules. I love this picture because not only does it show, what do you call it? Help me out. Why am I blanking? It shows Twain. Over here. Yeah, the Mark Twain. Thank you. Shows the Mark Twain. And then over here on the right-hand side, you can see all of the woods and grass and those hills and just a big old wagon like pulling through, which I just love it. Absolutely love it.
There's a good one of it actually with the mine train, but you can see the Conestoga wagon and then the stagecoach.
It's so cool.
So the stagecoaches and the Conestoga wagons both ended in 1960. That was probably when they added Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland. They just made a massive change in that area. The stagecoaches,
that whole area basically became mainly about the mine train, except for the pack mules.
Right, exactly. So they retired those at that time, mostly for safety reasons. The Conestoga wagon I believe that one did actually overturn at least once, because of it was unbalanced and it was massive. So, and that happened on the Oregon Trail too. So, that these things happen. But obviously not something you want with your guests. And then with the stagecoach, which we haven't talked about yet, but the stagecoach, the horses actually got startled by I think it was the whistle of the train, might have been the Mark Twain. In any case, it was a loud whistle and it startled the horses and they started running, and then it broke the attachment to the horses, and then the people actually did get injured. Nobody got killed, but they did get injured, and so they decided this is not a safe ride to have anymore. And they did originally have people that would ride on top of the stagecoach as well, and they discontinued that a lot sooner because it was just like kids chilling on top of the stagecoach. So
load them up.
Yeah, obviously not necessarily a very safe one. Are you going to talk about the stagecoaches? Did you want to go there?
Not yet. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the wagons real quick, and then we'll get over to this.
More wagon talk. Got it.
Well, no, I just thought it's interesting. So the Conestoga wagons would go past, later on, it ends up going past like the desert area a little bit more than necessarily where the pack mules had actually traveled to. And this reminds me of when like you try to sell films based on attractions or sell attractions based on films, because in 1956 a film comes out, Walt Disney's Westward Ho! The Wagons. So yeah, I don't know, do you want to talk about stagecoaches? I can't. You need to get me out of the wagons. Please. I need to stop talking about wagons. I hate it. I'm done. I'm over it. I'll start with one out of context. There's Nixon in a stagecoach.
Okay. Yeah, he's all over Disneyland. He was like got kidnapped on the monorail. Nixon was a big part of Disney history.
Look, and kids are still over there, hanging.
But I do know about the stagecoaches is that they were made to be pony size. So they were made smaller. And Owen and Dolly Pope were also involved in making those stagecoaches as well. And Walt loved to drive them around the parks. Not like this was before they had the fire engine, which was kind of like became his preferred vehicle. But they did have the stagecoaches. And I know one really funny story is that Imagineer Claude Coates was a very, very tall person. And so Walt was driving around the park in the stagecoach, and he was offering rides to everybody who was like working there. And Claude Coates was like, I'll take a ride. And Walt was like, nope, you're going to ruin the scale if you get in this thing. So no, you can't have a ride. He like kept on driving because he was so tall. He was going to wreck the perspective. So
yeah, I mean the stagecoaches do look small. I mean even the people that are sitting on top,
Yeah, they're not large like they would be back in the Old West. So you can see what they look like. Like those are children sitting on top of this one, and it looks child-sized in a lot of ways. So I believe it was 5/8 scale, but I'd have to go look it up to be sure. But they were definitely smaller in scale. I feel like we talked a little bit about these when we did our Main Street Vehicles episode as well.
Yeah, we did very, very briefly. Yo, how about this? I found this random like advertisement for the Frito House in Frontierland, but they put like stagecoaches and a Conestoga wagon in it.
Wow, there you go.
Relive the experience of our pioneer forefathers who explored and won the West in their Conestoga wagons and stagecoaches. Delight to the early day adventures aboard it as the stage swings through the painted desert. But nothing is more exciting than America's favorite corn chips. Good eating, fun, and excitement. Sure enough, you'll find them in Disneyland too.
Everything Fritos just makes me happy every time we get into that.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I do know also that they made the pinstriping was done. So like the popes, I believe, did the stagecoach, and then they did the fine details of the painting was all the studio artist did all of that. So if you look at the pinstriping that was on the wheels, the yellow, the gold that's like around the windows and whatnot, all of that was done by studio artists. Literally trying to pull any fact I can remember out of my brain.
Dude, there's
it's like, what do I have?
No, there's not as much stuff about the this is all I could find. It was like a bunch of pictures about it, and that it basically went a similar route as the Conestoga wagons. So
yeah, it was because there was too many accidents, and they were just like, this doesn't make sense, and they were very low capacity, so they were slow loading and low capacity. And so they just decided this doesn't make sense. By 1960, they're like, yeah, we're done with this because it's a liability and it's slow loading. We need to have more capacity because by 1960, we're heading into that time when they're realizing people don't want to wait in line for a long time for these rides because they've been open for 5 years by that point. So, do you have anything else about wagons you would like to share?
Yeah, I got one more. I'm never letting this die. I'm gonna keep talking about wagons. So coming full circle,
like
here is this
wheel circle.
This is a stagecoach, not at Disneyland, but at Knott's Berry Farm. So Knott's Berry Farm ended up doing stagecoach rides as well after they saw Disneyland doing them. So
yeah, so if you go to Disneyland today and you head to Galaxy's Edge via Frontierland, you'll see a red stagecoach that's sitting there, and it has I'm trying to remember what it's written on the side, but it looks like WED for like wed, but that one has a W that looks kind of like the K in Knott's Berry Farm, and that I believe is because they borrowed that stagecoach from Knott's Berry Farm and then put it on display in Disneyland. I think it was just on loan. Because that stagecoach is not one of the original Disneyland ones. If you look at them side by side,
I'm not done.
Gosh, just keeps going.
No, this is cool. This is a souvenir that they made back in the 50s, and it was a model that you could put together, a plastic model that had 4 horses and a stagecoach with a driver. And I did find one. So you were supposed to like pull these stencils out and paint. And so like you would literally punch these out and that would become the stencil.
You know, it's so interesting to me that early Disneyland was so focused on transportation, like just every kind of transportation you can think of was at Disneyland, right? We got like keel boats, we got a raft ride, we have the Mark Twain, so we have the stern wheeler, we have trains, we had a Surrey, we had all these early motor cars, right? And the horseless carriages. We have wagons of all varieties. It's just like every kind of transportation you can think of. It's going to happen. It's going to be very kinetic. There's going to be people moving from here to there. And then that continued when we had the people mover and we had things that happened. And, so what is that?
That's everyone in the chat waiting for us to move on.
Let's move on to the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train, which opened on July 2nd of 1956. So this is about a year, a little bit short of a year after Disneyland opened. Bob Gurr said that this is Walt's choice. Right after Disneyland's first summer, he said, what do we do next? We'll do a railroad because they're easy to design and build. And they already made a few, right, for the parks. We already had the Disneyland Railroad. We already had Casey Jr. We know how to do railroads, so let's just make another one. That's the logic of that. Of course, this is the point where they're stabilizing the hills with adding more vegetation and trees and whatnot. But the attraction itself is patterned after Walt Disney's The Living Desert, which is one of those true life adventures. So if you remember when we talked about the Jungle Cruise, we talked about some of the documentaries that inspired the Jungle Cruise. Well, this is The Living Desert, which inspired the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train. So this attraction cost $500,000, which was the most expensive addition to the park to date at that point. The original concept was by Harper Goff, and then there was further design done by Bill Martin to kind of organize it with the Conestoga wagons and the stagecoaches and the pack mules and all the things that were happening there.
The one do we want to talk about?
Yeah. So what Kirk's showing you there is they did these wonderful storybooks. Anytime they were going to open a new land or attraction, they would have this like storybook, that like sign that they would put up to show the map of what they were going to put there. So that's what's on that storybook there, is showing you the map of the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train. So this was going to be a 7-acre ride integrating the pack mules, stagecoaches, and Conestoga wagons into the same area. And then there was it was going to be a slow-moving train ride through the Painted Desert and the Rainbow Caverns. It was a 7-minute ride that traveled over 1,700 feet of track in a long figure 8. And it was also Disney's first D-ticket attraction when it opened, which I can show you. It was 30 cents. This is what the tickets look like for the Rainbow Caverns. The funny thing is that the publicity for this ride, they said that it was boarding a real mining train and thrill to Rainbow Caverns Falls. Unforgettable spectacle of multicolored waterfalls deep inside the mysteries of Rainbow Caverns, and a cinder spouting mine train. Except it wasn't. First of all, there was no mine in this mine train ride, and it also didn't spout any cinders because it was electric. So
Woogie, woogie, woogie.
So the trains themselves were the Rainbow Mountain Mining and Exploration Company. So they call it the Rainbow Mountain Railroad for short. So RMRR, which you can see if you look on some of the trains, they actually say that on them. So you can see that there are these green trains here, but they couldn't use any steam locomotives in the park at the time they couldn't use any additional ones. They couldn't use them for the mine train because Disney forgot to get permits for the Disneyland Railroad trains and the Mark Twain. So they already had 3 steam engines in Disneyland that didn't have any permits. They were not permitted for Orange County. So when they wanted to make yet another train with a steam engine, the county is like, no, you can't, because you didn't do the thing you were supposed to do. So they had to make them electric motor locomotives instead. So they had 4 electric motor locomotives. They were painted green, and they were designed by Roger Broggie, who also made the other Disneyland Railroad ones. They were patterned after an early 1900s industrial steam engine, and made to look older because of the details like the wood burner smoke at the front. So I guess there's kind of cinder, but it's not what's making the train go. Like they had the effect of a steam train, but it wasn't really. You can see what they look like here. Each locomotive ran on a 30-inch narrow gauge track. They were 11 feet in length and 4 feet 4 inches in width. So they pulled 6 ore carts, so that's what the people would sit in. And that one is not the right train, because that is for Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. So if you see a yellow train in history, it's Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. If you see a green train, it is the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train. So that's how you can tell which one is which in history. They get very muddled. This is actually a little bit of a soapbox for Kate, so just hold on tight for a second. Kate's going to get on our soapbox. Disney historians out there, please pay attention to what was Rainbow Caverns Mine Train and what was Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, because they weren't the exact same ride. They were different. And so many historians just throw them into a big pot, and they're just like, they're the same ride, and they show footage from one, and then next scene will be footage from another. And I was like, that's not the same ride. And it makes it so muddled when you're trying to like learn of the history, like what was what. So please pay attention to the color of your trains. Please and thank you. Sorry, you got wagons. I've got colored trains. Anyway, are you still there? I feel like
No. Now I'm looking up Now I'm looking up green trains for you. I'm trying to get as many green trains as I can.
I was not trying to be mean to you. I was just like, that's not the right train.
No, you're not bothering me at all. I'm learning.
Pet peeves. I'm like, okay. All right. So each locomotive pulled 6 ore carts. They were
time out though. It's the same train though, right?
It is the same train. It's not the same ride though. So it is.
No, I agree with you. But it's also the same. It's the same track, right?
Yeah, it's the same. Kind of, sort of, yes. Okay, but they did. It changed pretty drastically when it became Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. So each ore cart could seat up to 10 guests on benches on each side, which is kind of interesting because it's a little bit configured like the ones that are in Disneyland Paris for their train. You don't sit in benches like you do here in Disneyland or in Disney World. You actually sit in these little carts that are like little square, almost like the ore carts that are there. So I always wonder if that's a throwback to that. Each car had a little round speaker so that guests could hear the live narration done either by the engineer or in the locomotive or the brakeman at the end of the train. So they had a live spiel, kind of like Jungle Cruise does today. Eventually, they did replace the spiel with a pre-recorded one to allow operators to focus on the train rather than their performance. But I do have a note from a former cast member named Dave Hall, who said, "One night I hopped on the back of Dan Nichols' train to do the live spiel. I did the straight spiel, but I'd occasionally interrupt it to explain that I had a real phobia about snakes, and if anyone saw a snake, to raise their hand and please let me know. As we're going through the painted desert, one guest said, 'I think I see a snake.' So I stopped the train, and a few more people pointed out the snake. I climbed out and individually thanked everyone on the train for pointing it out, and then I jumped on top of the snake and started wrestling it. I was whipping its head against a cactus and everything. I finally got back on the train, and for the rest of the trip, everyone was completely silent. Even when we went through the Rainbow Caverns, which usually got a big reaction, complete silence. We pulled into the station and they gave me a standing ovation. I think they thought we did that every trip." I just don't know if it was a real snake or did he plant a fake one? Like, what?
There's no way he would do. If one, did he actually have a phobia, or two, did this even happen? I'm assuming it was a fake snake and he bashed it.
That's what seems like to me. Disney people are storytellers, right? That's what Kevin Lively told us. And I think, but it's funny no matter what it is. So I do want to talk about the men who worked on the attraction, because this is such an incredible piece of Disney history that I don't think most people know about. And that the men who worked the attraction for Rainbow Caverns Mine Train started a club, which is the oldest continually operating club in Disneyland, and it's called the Order of the Red Handkerchiefs. And so basically the order started when the mine train operators, known as miners, would meet after work for drinks at a local bar to play cards, especially liar's poker, at somebody's house. So like there's a lot of like people we know from that worked in Disney in this, like Ron Dominguez and Dick Nunes. They were both miners in this. So the ride operators who opened the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train bragged about being the best because they spieled the entire trip themselves without recorded audio. So think of like how the Jungle Skippers, they're very like, I'm not saying anything mean about the Jungle Skippers. I love the Jungle Skippers, but like you think of like they had like this kind of like we're really important to the show because we give this live narration, right? That was kind of their attitude there. George Kissinger, who was a cast member for the mine train, said, "We used to have these red handkerchiefs we wore around our necks as part of our costume. Then they changed the costumes, but we still had them and would carry them around in their pockets." So what happened was when they changed the attraction in 1960 to Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, they found a lot of new cast members had been added as operators when they all kind of came back to the ride. So the charter team wanted to keep their significance and stand out, kind of like a clique. So they began wearing red handkerchiefs as part of their costumes, but were quickly told to stick to the correct costume. So not to be discouraged, they put the handkerchiefs in their back left pockets, being sure to let just enough hang out so that everybody knew who they were and what part of a club that they were part of, right? Over time, as crews changed, the original operators kind of cycled out, and many cast members and the attraction just started adopting this tradition. So this actually became a thing that they now meet up. They have certificates, the certificate order of the red handkerchief. And I have from Ron Dominguez's retirement, he got a handkerchief, and he has it signed here from 1994. It says Happy Trails on it. But when the group still meets today, although it's expanded to include anybody that's worked the west side of the park. And some Disneyland Railroad train operators today have been known to wear a red handkerchief in their back left pockets as an homage to the group and their significance, even though they can't be members themselves because they're not West Side operators. When the ride closed in 1977, many of the miners went into the attraction, actually grabbed a few souvenirs from the attraction before the tracks were removed as well. So the Order of the Red Handkerchief, Order of the Red Handkerchiefs is what the club is called. And it is the oldest operating club in Disneyland today, which I think is just a fun story.
That is a fun story.
Yeah. So here's what they look like.
Coming to a TikTok near you.
This attraction was said by some to be Walt Disney's favorite attraction. And that when guests would come to the park, he would take them on this mine train ride because he really wanted to show it off to them. And he was really proud of it. So that being said, everything else I have so much information, but I feel like we should stop there because it's going to be a whole nother episode worth of stuff. So keep this wagon rolling for the next few weeks. Indeed. We have quite a few weeks to this one, I think.
And then after that, I'll do another 12 episodes about covered wagons. So buckle up.
But I think that's where we just kind of roll to a stop for this episode. Big thunder.
Yeah, we don't want this episode to wag on, so just end it, please.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of Distory as we dig into a brand new series all about the history of the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, as well as everything that came before it in Frontierland. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we're looking forward to digging more into the history of the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train next week, and then on from there to see how all of these things impacted Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Kirk, do you have any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Sometimes mules can be Scandinavian donkeys.
I would say sometimes they call it a mine train, but there's no mine train components in it. And that's okay.
It's a cavern.
Yeah. And it's called Oregon, not Oregon.
I did learn that today. That was big.
Very important.
I'm still going to mess it up.
Alrighty. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next time for Distory.
See you guys.